Hi, everyone. Welcome to your second session, and welcome to Cathleen, who is our speaker for today. Cathleen is currently sharing the role of Pasifika Outreach and Retention Officer at Queensland University of Technology in Brisbane, and she's also an emerging Moana Oceania researcher and a PhD candidate at University of Queensland in the School of Architecture. Her research examines the social construct of university spaces and how Pasifika practitioners and students navigate this VAR that is contradictory of Pasifika practices, philosophies, and values. So I'll hand it over to Cathleen to tell us a bit more about herself and to deliver her presentation.
Awesome, thank you. So I'm going to begin, but before I begin, because I am technology is not my forte, can you see my slides clearly as opposed to my notes, or can you see my notes and slides?
We can see your slides.
Just the slides.
Oh, perfect. Okay, cool. All right, I'm just going to put the timer here. As you can see, I'm trying to take out my time procrastinating. Okay, let me just move this here. Awesome. I just want to say thank you to Isaiah and Analatai for that introduction. I also want to acknowledge the traditional owners, the Turrbal and the Yarraga people on the lands I join you from today, where sovereignty was never ceded here in Queensland, Brisbane. I pay respect to the elders, past and present, laws, customs, creation spirits. I recognise these lands have always been places of teaching, learning, and wisdom. I recognise the emerging leaders and all those who identify as Indigenous or Torres Strait people in the room or in the Zoom this morning. I want to honour my ancestors who have instilled in me my cultural values and knowledge to Talanoa and share, present and listen with you all today. Holopeho mo mea, ka hua tupeo whainga o whainga maalia koe ni ke si tuku mai te o kau I he Talanoa mo whakalaka e taungahi le soni mo whainga ako te pompomini. O pute o laki tuha whawhetai ke tau e kienisi o mai ai whainga maalia koe ni. Ke tau Zoom o Talanoa, mo amanaki ke te whakalele e tau ngawe. O ko whakatapu atu ki he ngahi toke tā, mo ngahi academics, whai ako o mosi mea mai pongpongi ni, he whoki ki he ngahi delegates and attendees, o ko mosi tuko mo taimi, ke mo hau o whanongo mai ki he whiwhene tae tau koe ni. Ko kawai pe I whakamalo ki he ngahi maheni o mo tuko mo taimi ke mo si hau e tau Talanoa I he mea okulele. So I just wanted to acknowledge the conference organisers, the other speakers before me, and those who are currently presenting and the key speaker that will speak later on this afternoon. I want to acknowledge my fellow delegates and attendees. Thank you for choosing to come and attend this session, and also my peers and support people who I can see who have taken time out of their schedule to be here today. So I really appreciated it. All right, friends, I have a very different approach to presenting. I am going to somewhat speak off the cuff, as well as share some of the research that I have taken part, but more so about the work that I've done within the university. So today, my title is to disrupt the VAR to Tauhi VAR, disrupting spaces to create and maintain harmonious spaces in relationships. The title of my Talanoa was influenced by an article around the same time I was asked to participate in this conference. And the article was written by Langi Mama Academy and Consultancy. And you can find this article on their website. And so really what the title of their article was about was talking critically yet harmoniously. It's in our bloodlines as Moana Oceania peoples. And the one thing that I took away, well, one of the many things that I took away from this article was a reminder for us who occupy spaces of influence, right? And who are also taught in Western institutions to acknowledge our Indigenous knowledge by sharing and, more importantly, practicing it. And this does require, debate, question, mediating Talanoa in order to reach a betterment for the collective and not individuality or institutions that we often represent. And so really that's the premise of my title and what it will continue to be in the content of my presentation. Cool, so just a very quick overview. I hope for the next 20 minutes. I'm going to share a little bit about the routes and the routes that I've taken. I think that's all part of Tauhi in order to make connections and give you an understanding of the lens that I bring this morning. I want to touch base on what is the intention, like what is it that I actually want from this, 20 minutes that we get to Talanoa. Maybe give you a bit of an overview or a very brief overview of what Va and spaces from an Indigenous Pasifika lens, and then maybe looking at how we can disrupt the Va. I think it's really important that we question the spaces that we are in, and we go through a process of critically examining those spaces to hopefully continue the Tauhi Va. I want to speak a little bit about the physical spaces, university spaces. Then I'll quickly recap, maybe propose a challenge for us all, and then continue to Talanoa. And I think the whole purpose of Talanoa is not just me talking, there's an opportunity where you will get to engage. And I think that's the real richness of what Talanoa proposes us to do, is that it's not just, a teacher talking to students or an expert, talking to an audience. I really hope that there's an opportunity where we can dialogue quite critically, robustly about some of the content that I have to deliver. So, just very quickly from my accent, you can tell I'm a New Zealander residing here in Australia, but, my roots are very much planted in Tonga. So I identify first and foremost as a Tongan woman, and my dad comes from Pokotala, and my mum is from Neiafo. And so I have very strong links to Tonga, but born in Vanuatu and very much, spent quite of my time very much in the early stages of my life living in Vanuatu, and still have real strong connection to family that is in Vanuatu. So I often claim I'm a Nivan, and maybe the one thing that I lacked was that, I wasn't able to speak French, which, that is one of the things that I admire about my dad, who is his French is more fluent than his English. And so we have very, very strong connections to Vanuatu. New Zealand will always be home. Most of my formative years in way of education and my early career was very much established in New Zealand. So I come with the lens of someone who's lived in Aotearoa and worked in the spaces of higher education in Aotearoa. And now I reside across the ditch here in Australia, Queensland, and really trying to further enrich my knowledge and experience with regards to advancing Pasifika in higher education. Now, I may be an architect or a town planner, but my drawings do not reflect that. But I think a way to illustrate, my roots, coming from the roots of where I feel very planted, a graduate similar to what Bronwyn mentioned earlier on, a graduate of the University of Auckland, a geographer with the intention of was going to be a teacher, but that did not prevail. So you know, after I graduated, I really didn't know what to do with my life, to be honest, but was really fortunate to find employment at Manukau Institute of Technology and was the second appointed first female Pasifika liaison officer at MIT. And so I worked along, the likes of Tupai Pepe, who was probably one of the founding Māori and Pasifika liaison officers many, many years ago. And so I worked at MIT for a number of years, decided to come back to the University of Auckland and worked in equity in the way of student as well as staff for a number of years. And while working at university, you want to take advantage of learning. And so in that time, I was able to, pursue my geography, not as a teacher, but wanted to be a town planner. And so I decided, you know what, I'm going to go and do my master's in town planning. And I think there was really only 2 of us out of the cohort of maybe 23 who did not go on and pursue town planning because, I didn't really want to be in that system of my relatives coming and asking me to approve their permits to build their illegal dwellings on their property. So I'm like, I'm not going to go into town planning. Stayed in the University of Auckland, moved on to different positions. And then I decided I don't want to be a town planner, I'm going to do education. And so I decided I'll do a master's in education and learning more about how our communities experience university. And so after that, done a short stint at Monash University in Melbourne, was there for a little while, went back to the University of Auckland. After a year or 2, came back to Melbourne, enrolled at Melbourne University, done further study, ended up over here in Queensland. I also worked at Victoria University in Footscray, and that was again working with, equity groups, mainly in the west side of Melbourne. Then I somehow got here before COVID, working now at QUT as one of the Pasifika liaison officers, working in schools in our north side, region, and wanted to pursue more study and doing, as mentioned, a PhD candidate in architecture. And I think that's really the lens that I bring this morning, as one is that knowledge for me has always been quite, pivotal in the way that I engage with not just my family, but the communities that I serve. It's really important that we continue to educate ourselves and be within the spaces of influence. My intention today very much is around sharing knowledge to empower. I really hope that you walk away feeling empowered about some of the things that I want to challenge you on, and to remember that majority of us who are in this space are very privileged. So we come with the lens of, being privileged. And so I want people to remember that. I want us to be challenged. And then, as I said earlier, I hope there's an opportunity to Talanoa and exchange knowledge. Right, okay, so this is really the core of what I'm wanting to share with you, is with regards to VA, the space. And you will hear many speakers have spoken about space already, but I want you to understand that I was taught very much in the lens of a geographer and a planner. So the concept of space to me initially was a very Eurocentric understanding of space and place. And so, there's the work of Doreen Massey, Henry Leveux, David Harvey. These are all geographers and theorists of space. And so my thinking has often been from that lens. And it wasn't really until my master's I started to deconstruct myself and also understand, the notion of VA and space within a Pasifika Indigenous lens. And so, for the purpose of this Talanoa, that is the lens that I will share with you all, is from a Pasifika Indigenous space. I think for a lot of us who may not know what VA is, and my apologies because I can see some experts within the attendees who are very much experts. So I'm going to just let people know that if you want to have, an input or question around this, please feel free to do. But there are a number of established and renowned Pasifika scholars who have spoke widely on Va. And, in the purest form, Va is beyond the physical. So it goes beyond your socially constructed spaces. It's inclusive of our spiritual, in turn relates to the past, present, and future. And, Va really is about the relationships, the socio-spatial relationships that exist in Oceania and also within Pasifika. And I think that's quite core to the connections that are made and how we engage with our community in spaces that are often contested. And so, Va is more about what you see in the physical buildings. It goes beyond that. And so the other aspect that I wanted to allude to and not spend too much time is that Va and Da, or Da and Va, are very much overlapped, or they always go together. So they're never seen as side by side. And I guess my challenge to you is to go away and find out more about the Da-Va theory, because I tell you, it will take more than the next 2 minutes for me to unpack that, for you to grasp the understanding of that theory that Dr. Okusi Mahina pretty much initiated, and many other scholars have developed. So that's really the Va that I use as my framework for this particular presentation, but the way that I engage within my work of space and within the community that I engage with. To disrupt the Va very quickly, because I can see Bronwyn is in the attendees. These are the spaces that I would like people, and I imagine, or I assume that those who are in this space occupy these spaces, university spaces, whether you are a teacher, whether you're an academic, whether you are a student, you occupy university spaces. For those of us who are in the professional realm, who are lawyers, who are engineers, who are often in spaces that our people are not of the majority, and you work in those spaces. I also want to talk about schools, where I imagine there are some students who are in schools present today. There are some teachers, there might be a principal, there might be careers advisors who engage with schools or school students and families. And lastly, I want to talk about equity in education, and that is the space that I occupy. And these spaces, I think, are spaces we really need to disrupt. So equity in education, and there's a lot of work that's happened around this. Nohi Sifa-Williams, Dr. Nohi Sifa-Williams, Sam Stanley, Dr. Margaret Taurere are just some academics who have written around equity, and that it serves, for a lot of people, it looks like it's really serving and uplifting our communities in universities. But I think you need to be critical about equity, because it's still very much dictated by those who are in positions of power. So they will facilitate, what funding that we receive in order to execute a number of our initiatives. They're the ones who will deem what percentage of us need to be in university. They deem what the evaluation is that we need to determine whether some of our programs are successful. And I think we need to be brave enough to question that, because it does have a very much deficit model in the way that we engage with our communities, or how the universities dictate or facilitate how equity should be worked in education. And so, for me, that's pretty much been an area where I've learned to disrupt spaces and question people who are in power of their intentions and the things that they demand of us that makes universities look inclusive, look vibrant, look diverse, right? And then you have schools where there are gatekeepers, where there are principals, where there are teachers, that often will direct the path they see appropriate for our families. And I think we, as people who are in spaces of influence and knowledge and capacity to disrupt those spaces and even challenge some of the teachers who may be here today, or to really think about their approaches in engaging with our young people in schools. I'm just wary of time, but I want to go to university spaces. And university spaces is spaces that I occupy. And my research is looking at the physical spaces. And so although I've spoken of bar, it's really important to look at the physical spaces, because that is what we encounter when we enter university. It's the buildings, it's the open spaces. And those are often designed by people who bring a different lens. And unconsciously, you may not know that those spaces influence the way that you think. They influence the way that you speak, the way that you act. And you don't necessarily know that maybe until you enter into spaces of bar, of Tauhi bar, and then you're like, wow, I have been really colonized about my behaviors, about my actions. And so my purpose is looking at physical spaces. And I think physical spaces are important for universities, because universities in both Australia and New Zealand are planted on Indigenous land. And so those relationships are already contested. And so what is our position when we come into those spaces? Do we genuinely acknowledge and engage with our Indigenous, our First Nations people? And to what degree, and how does that really look? And I think spaces, unintentionally, they create, and you probably will know this, is that it's power. So spaces are constructions of power. And you can look at that with prisons, you can look at that in hospitals, how they're designed. They actually make people behave in a certain way. Even churches, you go into church, you already know what to do. You can't be doing TikToks in church. So that the behaviors of understanding how to navigate those spaces are very much already present because of the physical spaces themselves. And so I think it's really important to know that there are safe spaces, cultural spaces that exist in universities, but we still need to unpack those spaces to see whether they are really enriching and bringing a different meaningful experience for our Pasifika students and academic and practitioners. Cool. Okay, Bronwyn, you might want to indicate to me I need to round up, don't I?
No, you're doing great, sis. So it's past, so you have 5 minutes. I know you got this, but no, you're doing a great job.
Okay, and so this slide here is really, we talk about disrupting, we talk about you questioning, critically examining some of the spaces, some of our behaviors, some of our thoughts, our engagement. But then what do you do after? I'm not wanting people to lose jobs here. I'm not wanting people to be disgruntled. I think we need to understand that there is the practice of Tauhi ba, and that there is a notion that we still want to nurture, we still want to invest, we still want to educate, people who may not be Pasifika or not may have that lens, to understand how do we Tauhi ba. And I think Tauhi ba is the everyday, it is the everyday how we communicate that. It is making connections. This is an example of making connections. It's understanding how are we respectful of not just our peers, but people who are in authority. And also being prepared to give back. I think for those of us who are in positions of influence, we do have the tendency to give back to our communities. And I think it's really important that we continue to do that, but also bring others into the bar. Understand that there are other individuals who may not necessarily be comfortable in Pasifika Indigenous spaces. How can we encourage and support those individuals to come and be part of the bar to further their career or further the way that they practice in spaces that we don't necessarily occupy? And I think it's really important that we continue to honor our Pasifika worldviews. And so, very quickly, I'm going to recap. Okay, I think we do need to acknowledge, and it exists. I don't think anyone should say, I didn't know that that was a thing. I didn't know that I could get access to that information or to that person. I think we really need to acknowledge the richness that we bring into the spaces that I've spoken about. Let us be mindful of the bar that we occupy. Let us be conscious in the way that we behave in those spaces. Let us continue to tauhi wā. Let us continue to critically examine the wā that we occupy. And I guess more importantly is that we build those relationships. And so I think there is opportunity for us to continue to reflect regardless of where we are positioned in universities, if I may say so as a practitioner. But how do we continue to build that wā? How do we continue to create these nuances that, our keynote speaker spoke about earlier? Those are some of the things that I wanted to recap and hope that you can take away. Right. And the challenge I leave with you very quickly is you are in these spaces for a purpose. Whether you are an academic, whether you are a student, whether you are here or you come from another space, you are here for a reason. And I think it's really important that you have to be guided in those spaces. You need to tauhi wā, so you are equipped to navigate those spaces so that you can shift minds, hearts, thinking and feelings. Okay. And I think the other thing that I really encourage you to do, and I've said that probably a number of times, is to be brave to disrupt the wā, and then to tauhi the wā, and to reach a state of harmonious and transformative spaces. And I think it's really important that you connect, that you geolewa, that you network with others that can really support you in how you tauhi wā. Cool. I don't know, I'm so sorry. Hopefully I can talanoa with you all in other spaces from this work, but very quickly, thank you so much. Thank you for all being present today. I apologize if I fall short of your expectation. That just means I need to go and do more reading as a PhD candidate. And I'm still trying to navigate that wā too. These are my contacts. Please feel free to send me an email. I'm happy to assist you. I'm not an expert, can I just say that, but I do know a lot of things. I do know a lot about a lot of things.